I think a team that may rival that same position would be Nebraska. Now,
Yes.
the only show in town. Nebraska, they lose a tough one to Illinois. What was your immediate reaction to that game, and how it would affect Nebraska going forward?
My immediate reaction is everybody in Nebraska is going to freak out and go, "Oh no, another one possession loss. It's happening again." Stepped on, fell on our faces again. I don't think it's that. Like, it didn't feel that way. It felt like Nebraska played well enough to win. There were mistakes. Like Dylan Raiola misses a wide open receiver in the end zone that would have won in the game at the end of the game. But I think Illinois was just good. Like, Brett Bielema is a good coach. Luke Altmaier played great. I think this was a case of Nebraska playing a team that was about as good as Nebraska. And they played a game where they were tied at the end. And then one played better in overtime. Like that, I really don't think it's anything more than that. I think Nebraska still is going to be a bowl team. The question is, how good of a bowl are we talking about? And how good of a bowl we're talking about really depends on how they play in the games against the teams that they are equal to and can lose to. So that's Rutgers, that's Indiana. Those are games that they're going to be playing against pretty good teams that can beat them, but they should be able to beat them. So how do you play in those games? I'm not worried about them beating Ohio State. I actually think, depending on how things go, they could give USC a good game down the road. But the players who lived through the Scott Frost era and the, oh God, it's happening again, they have to realize it's different now. Matt Rhule has to establish with them, this is different now. Yes, you lost in a one possession game. That does not mean it's going to all come tumbling down again.
I love that, because I just interviewed a 4-star linebacker. He just shot up the rankings. Pierce Muberry, from Nebraska. His father played for Nebraska, and he said he feels like it's different. He said he watched it all. He saw it all. He's been going to Nebraska games since he can remember, and he said the energy around that program right now just feels different. What do you think the key was for Matt Rhule to infuse this energy into Nebraska to the point where recruits are now saying Nebraska feels different?
I think he did the same thing he did at Temple and Baylor. He's built it the same way. It's you just try to make the program tougher. You try to find the best athletes you can find and then fit them into roles as best you. Like, you look at the Baylor team that won the Big 12 title for Dave Aranda. Those were all Matt Rhule recruits. And when he recruited those guys, they weren't necessarily in the same positions they wound up playing at Baylor. He just went out and got a bunch of long, twitchy athletes and said, let's figure this out. And, that tends to create some energy when you got some dudes that are athletic and can play. And then now Dylan Raiola adds another element to that, where you have a quarterback who comes in pretty swaggy. I mean, he has that attitude and kind of gives off that aura. Whether or not he's earned it yet is another question, but it's there. And so I think it would be very exciting, I would think, if you are a recruit going to Nebraska now and you think, okay, this is something that can be built upon. Now they've got to get out of this. Like, they need to come back against Purdue and play really well. They need to have a get-right game. And then I think that'll help with the current players who did have to live through some really just gut-wrenching losses. They're like, okay, maybe what happened against Illinois was an anomaly. That's not us anymore. We're going to be okay. Like that's what they need. And they keep this going, and you show that you can win games like that down the road, and all the recruits are going to go, oh, well, this could be a really special place if they really get it going again. Because that's what I think, not just the guys out of high school, but the guys out of the transfer portal even more so, because how they're very business decision oriented in the transfer portal. They're going to see the facilities, the resources, how crazy they are about football there, and realize, oh, if I ball out here, I'm set. Like, that's the part about the NIL era that I think really helps Nebraska. But they got to get the football part of it right before everybody starts to really see all the benefits of it.
How does Nebraska get into the Southeast again? Now, I was really like a Nebraska fan in the mid-90s. Like, My favorite guy, on the field was, God bless him, Lawrence Phillips. Never seen anything like it when it came to running the football. But those guys aren't just in Omaha, Nebraska. They're across the world. They're across the country, excuse me. So how does Nebraska close out on some of these guys with a national imprint? Like, they got really close on David Sanders. Now they're in it for Michael Terry. How do they return to a brand of national prominence?
Well, I think that they can be national because of NIL.
Okay.
Like, they can get, like, they got into the David Sanders sweepstakes because they could offer what Tennessee and Ohio State could offer. Right. So I think that's one way to do it. They're going to have enough money to be in the mix for these things. And I do think that the NIL era does help in terms of not tying people to geography. Now, as far as the Southeast go, what's the best player from Nebraska to ever come from the Southeast?
Tommy Frazier.
That's Tommy Frazier.
Absolutely.
But Tommy Frazier went to Nebraska because nobody in Florida would let him play quarterback. Everybody's like, oh, we think you should play safety.
Right.
Well, he said, no, sir, I'm a quarterback. And I'll be honest, if Bill Callahan had been coaching Nebraska at the time and they weren't running the triple option, I don't know if they would have taken Tommy Frazier either.
Right.
But so I think that was a very, unique set of circumstances. But it's not like they haven't been able to recruit. Like, Mike Rozier came from New Jersey. A lot of their best players have come from different parts. You mentioned Lawrence Phillips. He played high school football in California. They've been able to get guys from everywhere, and they're going to have to get guys from everywhere. And I think, they have the resources to do it. And the one good thing about Matt Rhule having been successful at Temple and at Baylor is that he's had to learn multiple areas of the country in terms of the recruiting landscape. So to have a Texas pipeline, to have a Northeast pipeline, which, by the way, both have been very good for Nebraska over the years.
Yeah.
Very helpful. Yeah. Now you got to do California and the Southeast as well, but that's how it works.
What is a corn husker?
Somebody who shucks corn. You take the husk off the corn.
Oh, wow. Well, that sounds like you got to be a pretty tough guy. So I can see if you're a guy that shucks corn, I can see that. All right.
That's right. They like their fullbacks. Although listen, if Nebraska could get just a absolutely lights out receiver,
right?
Jeremiah Smith's going to Ohio State,
right?
But somebody like that who's big and physical and good body control and can move, like Cam Coleman at Auburn. Now, obviously, Cam Coleman grew up 5 minutes from Auburn, but that's more like 20. It's Phoenix City. But can you convince somebody like that to come out to Lincoln? Because they need that. Because I don't think Nebraska wants to play the style that Illinois plays. They don't want to play the style that Iowa plays. I get that's where they are in the country. But Matt Rhule's smart enough to know that you're expected to compete for Big Ten titles. And if you're expected to compete for Big Ten titles, you better be able to compete with Ohio State and Penn State. And so that's the thing is get those athletes on the outside, which is going to be harder. That's going to be the hardest thing for them to get. But if you have the QB, I think that does help draw those guys a little bit more.
Yeah, I think if they can maybe dip into the Detroit area, there's a guy in Vegas right now that's lights out. I think his name is Derek Meadows. Like that 6'6".
I would say, isn't he going to LSU?
Yep, going to LSU. So
yeah, that's a place that's producing pretty good quarterbacks though, and some very good receivers.
right. That's how he would go so far. So I'm thinking, to your point, if you got proof of concept, you probably got a guy who has the potential to be the best quarterback in the country when it's all said and done in a couple of years, right?
I think you try to overpay.
Okay.
For a receiver, a couple of receivers, either out of the portal or out of high school ranks, because you can, because you have the resources to do it. And I think that's what Tennessee, like when Nico's deal came out, we all went nuts. Tennessee overpaid for Nico.
Man.
It's going to wind up being a bargain. But if it hadn't worked out, you still should have tried it, because that's the only way in on some of these players that weren't looking at you earlier.
Imagine Auburn overpaying for a quarterback in the transfer portal.
Just imagine. Yeah, I had somebody text me this week about, well, no, Hugh was right because none of those guys are worth whatever. And I'm like, Hugh's job's to win. It's not to regulate the prices in the quarterback market in the transfer portal. Like,
no, you're right.
And I also think he could have gotten some guys that were a little bit cheaper. If that's like Jordan McLeod over at Texas State. If you put him at Auburn, is he playing better than the guys they got?
Man, Jordan McLeod would have walked to Auburn. Absolutely.